Hey everybody, this week we are going to be making a slab tray. You're going to make one slab tray between now and the end of the week, and you're going to create a slab tray you might want to use for a specific food dish, condiments, or maybe just to hold your stuff, but something simple for the table and something that can be useful. The base should be no more than 8 inches in any one direction. The walls should be no taller than 3 to 4 inches max. A low tray with 1 to 2 inch walls is just fine, so it doesn't need to be all that elaborate, and definitely tall, because then you're starting to talk about a vase rather than a tray. You can add feet to it, lugs, handles, or a decorative rim as you wish, or you can leave it really simple. And you're free to embellish the sides or the interior, or not. You can leave it simple. No lid on this tray. In other words, leave it without a lid. We'll worry about that later. Okay? All right, so let's get into it. For our inspiration, we're going to be referencing the slab serving trays begun in the 17th century in the city of Mino, Japan. And you can see right here where Mino is, right in the middle of Japan, having a lot to do with the wabi-sabi aesthetic and tradition. And we'll also consider some other sources, but we're going to start there. And Mino ware was started as a reaction to the tea ceremony and creating objects for that tea ceremony. It also developed specific kinds of glazes. One is a ribe and another is shino. There's a bunch of other glazes that were also developed in Mino that had to do with the pottery they were making for the tea ceremony, but these are two of the most probably well-known, ribe and shino, and we'll be glazing your work with those glazes. The tea ceremony, as you know, is something that's still a strong element of the Buddhism and the Zen tradition, and also displays aspects of wabi-sabi. And it's something that still goes on today, as does the ceramic tradition there in Mino. Okay, this is just an example of a tea bowl, like maybe some of the ones that you just made in the first week, and this has an application of a shino glaze, which is something that we'll do on one of your tea bowls that you bring into the studio, if you decide to do that. This, where it's orange, is where the glaze application was thin, and shino is unique in that as it gets thicker, the glaze gets thicker. There's another splatter of the same glaze, but where it was thicker, it goes white. So that's just a characteristic of shino. And this is the characteristics of a ribe, which is a kind of a green glaze because it has a lot of copper in it. So these are some good examples, and you might end up with some pots that look just like that. All right, here's a great example of a tray which has a shino glaze on it, which was applied thickly. And as you can see, it's lighter because it was applied thickly, and it has crazing, or these little crackles, which can be very sort of wabi-sabi, right? Here's an example of both. There's the ribe glaze on the outside, and then there's shino glaze on the inside. In this case, iron oxide was used and rutile to put a pattern on. But we're going to keep it simple for our purposes, and simply make a simple serving tray that's low, and applying a shino glaze and then a ribe as some splotches and sort of highlights. In this case, it's kind of nice. It almost looks like it has a river coming through the middle of it, right? Here's a nice, perfectly nice tray, or plate, actually, but it's an example of what you're not going to do with this particular assignment, because what I'd like you to do in this first assignment is learn how to apply walls, to take a slab base and then apply walls like this. So these walls were separate slabs which were applied. In this case, they're only about 1 inch or so. And so your slab tray can have really low walls if you want, or they can get a little bit taller. And if you want to do carvings or something like that on the inside of it, that's perfectly fine. You can also have multiple chambers on the inside, or container areas on the inside of the interior space. Right? Different example, and you can see how it's not perfectly symmetrical. And I want you to just remember that we're using these as inspiration, and none of our projects, not only this project, but any of the projects we do, we're going to use inspiration, and we're going to kind of vibe on whatever it is we're looking at, but we're not trying to make replicas of those things. what we're trying to do is use what we're looking at as a kind of inspiration and explore that. So while Minoware is our starting point or our inspiration here, you're encouraged to look at variations, and we'll look at those together here as we go. But within that tradition of Minoware, look how many different types of shape there are that are started with. Asymmetry was, something that was very much explored in making interesting shapes for these serving trays. And also round shapes. And you can see besides the round shape here that the slabs, once they were applied, were pushed to make this almost floral-like pattern on the top. And you can also, there's options for you. You can add feet. You can't see them, but there'll be other examples where you see feet. And here is a basket-like handle for the top for picking the whole thing up. So it's an asymmetrical shape, but with a basket top. Same thing here. And it's not just simple circle, but it's got an interesting shape. And this basket top was made with a slab as well. All right. So what are some contemporary examples also? People working right now making low slab trays, serving trays. And here's a simple example, and this is perfectly fine. And you can also decide if you want to put some texture on the outside by things you find around the house or different objects. You can experiment with that if you desire. And here's some pretty simple examples. I think there's a lot more complexity you can find. Pretty simple boxy shapes, but with some interest added by carving on the outside, by creating a kind of framework, and then by carving a little bit away and then carving a pattern on the inside. Also by putting feet on. And if you decide to do that, just make sure these feet can be just simple slabs, but you could also make little objects or sculpt objects. But when you apply these, make sure that you score them thoroughly so that they stay. All right, another example of feet in a different kind of shape. And here's a simple slab container in process, but using the various, shapes of the flat slabs to make the rim a little more interesting. Same thing here, right? The multiple angles. And these are, so far, examples of kind of rigid, flat slabs, as is this by an artist from Oakland named Ron Nagel. And he's as much known as a sculptor as he is as a potter, and his objects are really highly controlled, but he also uses a slab method, the same that we're using. This is another artist who uses the kind of natural characteristics of the clay, the way it folds and bends, and the edges were kind of cracked when it was a little bit drier so that you see all this kind of weathering, and the inside was rolled out on a specific kind of fabric, so it also has a different kind of feel to it. So here's some variations on a simple slab tray. Now, if you want to keep yours simple, instead of rigid, you could just push out the walls a little bit after you've constructed it, right? Construct your piece, but then while it's still wet, push out. Or cut the piece beforehand and alter it a little bit. This is a beautiful example, and it's an example of altering this, but one thing this doesn't have, which we want, are added walls which lift, give the piece walls. You can also create a rounded base if you want, oval or round, and then a single long slab can be made to fit on top. And here's an example also of making the rim not necessarily flat, but giving it a kind of undulation. Okay, so here's some examples of oval or squarish but rounded edges, all by taking a specific shape and then putting a long slab on. And there's one spot here where you can't see it because they hit it once it was done, where it was then scored and connected. And then these handles were added afterwards. And there's some videos that you can see later on where I show you about pulling handles, and so does Carl. All right, another examples of texture on the outside and adding a slab rim on the top, and also these lugs. Here's a good example by an artist named Bruce Coburn from Canada, where he makes these kind of bread baskets, and he pierces them so that you can imagine putting a nice napkin or something, a big piece of cotton, and then the bread or a baguette in there nice and warm out of the oven. Anyways, beautiful pieces and similar kind of patterns as I'm showing you in the demonstration this week on handles and how to do very specific handles, kind of like this, kind of have a classical Greek feel to them. Okay, so just some other examples of simple, low serving trays, and with lugs and with handles and with feet. Now, none of those are things you have to do, but I want you to explore and find, push yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit and see if you can experiment. This is about as tall as you absolutely want yours to be, but it has a added lip and then added feet, which kind of echo each other. And again, Bruce Coburn, the artist from Canada, and the serving tray, which is quite sort of like a lot of added decorative, not so much handles as decorations that are added, and piercings at the bottom. Anyways, pretty elaborate. Maybe you don't do or don't want to go that elaborate. But here again is Ron Nagel, and using this simple slab container, believe it or not, this is clay, to make an oval form, but then adding something on the top where these two forms act like there's some kind of action or interaction going on between the two of them. Same thing here, again Ron Nagel, and using these kind of balancing elements within the slab tray to make it more of a piece of sculpture than actually something that you'd use for food or for keeping stuff in. Again, so I'm just showing you these as wild and kind of like extreme examples of how you can use the same techniques and take them to a kind of more cognitive, sort of cerebral point where you're expressing ideas a little bit more than simply, hey, I'm a slab container that I'm going to put my my condiments in for my dinner. But for our purposes, we're probably going to say something that's relatively simple and straightforward like this, right? And we're going to leave it to 8 inches maximum for the base and 3 to 4 inches maximum for the walls. But within that context, there's a lot of variation and exploration that you can do as far as what kind of shape and what kind of lugs and what kind of feet. And we're going to take it from there. Okay.